Mario & Luigi Brothership recently released as the first new game in the series in nearly a decade, and as such the developers took this chance to put tons of references to the series' past games in this one. References upon references upon references. I could seriously fill this entire video with just references, but there are of course also a ton of other fun facts that are solely unique to this game specifically, so today we're just gonna cover all of it, starting with some things I wouldn't say are big spoilers, and then later we can discuss some more spoilery stuff. Don't worry, I'll give a couple warnings, but just know going in that this video will have spoilers. Let's start with enemies. A couple of the ones in this game are based on ones from previous games, the first of which are the Invis-Lizards, which are based on the Coupelion from Partners in Time. They obviously look somewhat alike, but they also both have an attack where they turn basically invisible and then try to run into you. Secondly are Spike-Lees, which are clearly based on the Thorps from Dream Team, both basically just being balls with spikes on top. They don't share any attacks, but they do both have a move where they spin in circles around the bros. Guess that kinda counts. And lastly, Croats, these metallic tree stump looking guys, which are fittingly based on the Treevils from Bowser's Inside Story, which of course actually were trees. They both have an attack where they throw something resembling a stick at you. With Treevils it were tree branches, while with Croats it's metal pipes, which is, you know, funny, because it's a metal There are also some enemies that just straight up originate from previous games, instead of being just inspired by them, such as the Capnaps, which come from Dream Team and share basically the exact same attacks, where they run past both bros from top or bottom, or fall asleep and pace back and forth, waking up if you hit the ground instead of them, and an attack where they run at you, fall asleep for a second, and then continue running at you. Shark Bones originate from Superstar Saga, but play an extremely different role in this game. In their debut, they were just regular enemies that were always paired with another enemy called Sand Cheeps, and their gimmick was that they would hide in the sand, and you can't tell which is which as they have the same dorsal fin, and they would attack differently, meaning you have to remember which is which. In Brothership, Sand Cheeps don't appear at all, and Shark Bones take on the role of an enemy that's way too over-leveled for you, and you have to actually avoid instead of trying to fight, which the game makes extremely clear to you via an NPC that's practically dying to tell you to avoid them. If you do encounter them, they share a similar attack where they pop out the sand and bite you, but it's not really done in the same way, and it doesn't poison you either because it'll just kill you instead. And the last returning enemy is technically two enemies, the Ice-Ats and the Magmads, originating from Dream Team again, but have some differences as well. First of all, they originally had the ability to switch which of the two types they were, which they don't seem to be able to do anymore. And originally the Magmads had fiery heads, meaning you couldn't jump on them, while Ice-Ats were bald, meaning you could jump on them. But in Brothership, Ice-Ats now have an icy spike on their heads, meaning you can't jump on either of them now. They have one more move that's somewhat reminiscent of their past appearance, namely hiding in a puddle and popping out, forcing you to time your hammer swings. But now they don't surround you and you don't have to aim your hammer anymore, which kinda defeats the challenge if you ask me. The most interesting change here though is where you encounter them. In Dream Team you could only find them inside Luigi's dreams, aka in the dream world, but now in Brothership you find them in the real world. So I guess they became real somehow? Which is kinda weird because this series shares the same canon, and the past games have of course happened as hinted on a few occasions. So it's just a little weird you can find these guys in the real world now, but it's really not that big a deal. And yeah, those are all the enemy references, not counting generic Mario enemies of course because, well, that's expected and boring. So let's move on to something no MNL game is complete without, the bros attacks, as some of these also originate or are inspired by previous games. So let's cover those while we're still talking about battles. This means I'm about to spoil some of the bros attacks, so if you don't want to see those, skip to the next segment or click off the video. There's your warning, 3, 2, 1. The red and green shell were both introduced in Partners in Time, and have since reappeared in each following MNL game, though their functionality has changed quite a bit. The green one functions most like how it did in Dream Team, with the bros going into the foreground and closing in more and more with each kick, ending off with one strong charged kick, which now hits all remaining targets, as opposed to just one enemy again like in Dream Team. The red shell works completely differently, instead having the bros only kick it to each other, and then only hitting one target once, focusing on big damage, which is actually entirely new to this game. Ironically, this means they kinda work completely opposite as to how they originally did, since in Partners in Time, the green shell could only ever hit one enemy, with the red shell moving on to another enemy if the first one is defeated, meaning that one had multi-target damage instead of the green one like in Brothership. Last thing about the shells before we move on. The standard Koopa enemies have an attack where one of them kicks a shell of another Koopa at you, and if you counter this by jumping on it, you can kick the shell back and forth between Mario and Luigi for a while, damaging the enemies. pretty much exactly how the Shell Bros attacks worked previously, which is an insanely cool reference. Anyways, Jump Helmet comes directly from Bowser's Inside Story, though in this game Mario is the one to wear the helmet, with Luigi jumping on it instead of the other way around, and also is now controlled in 3D instead of 2D, though Mario runs forwards automatically, and you only have to press left and right, meaning it strangely controls almost the exact same way as previously. Bomb Derby originates from Dream Team. In that game, the final bomb was the same as the others, except a bit bigger and only hit one enemy, whereas in Brothership, the final bomb is instead replaced with a capsule, and Mario launches it in the air, which then opens up to reveal a ton of rockets, which hits all remaining enemies. Yoo-Hoo Cannon comes from Bowser's Inside Story again, and just like Bomb Derby, works the same way until the end. Originally, you just press the correct buttons to launch the bros from the cannons, and once you've gone through them all, that's that. But now in Brothership, after each hit, the copies of all bros now collect into this new big cannon in the back, which at the end shoots out all the bros in a massive ball, which then turns around and rams into all remaining enemies. And lastly, Mix Max Vortex is an entirely new bros attack, but it does seem largely inspired by a previous one, namely Luiginary Typhoon from Dream Team, as both moves start with you powering up a tornado in some way, followed by you controlling said tornado, going into the crowd of enemies, and mashing a button to deal continuous damage as you pick them off. Granted, the way you start the tornado is very different. Originally you just had to time one button press, whereas now you have to fill out a lot of spots with fire and ice, but you can't deny the second half of the attack works basically the exact same way. Another cool reference with this attack is the pose the bros take on within the tornado to make it spin, as it seems very reminiscent of the spin jump bros move, aka overworld ability, which is by far the most iconic one as it was introduced in the first game and then reappeared in every following game except Paper Jam, definitely making it worthy of a reference like this. And hey, that makes for a pretty good segue into another bros move reference, namely the Bro Ball, which comes from Partners in Time, though there it was called the Bros Ball instead. Massive difference, I know. Either way, it's the same move, having Mario and Luigi roll up into a ball, which you can then control, though the ability to charge up for a quick dash is new, coming at the cost of its ability to flatten babies. Okay. By the way, the new ball move at the end of Yoo-Hoo Cannon seems to be based on the Bros Ball, meaning it's referenced there as well. Another overworld ability that originates from a past game is Luigi being able to go inside of a barrel, which happens a few times throughout this game, and this also originates from Superstar Saga. In that game, it mainly functioned as a platform for Mario to reach higher up targets, and in Brothership it's used for stealth segments, so it's only really a referencing concept. Some more indirect references are a couple of animations. This is the first game in the series to primarily use 3D models, and the developers actually remade a bunch of animations that were originally sprite-based. For example, Luigi's dance when he levels up is based on his level up animation from Dream Team, though mirrored this time. And the pose he does at the end is also the same, including his hat tipping over and him fixing it with some flair. Nice. Mario's level up animation, or lack of one, is completely original, and kinda boring. However, the pose at the end comes directly from Dream Team as well. Man, why didn't Mario just do the dance as well? Loosen up a bit, it's not that serious, bro. A very similar case is with their animation when they're preparing to attack, with Luigi being a one-to-one recreation of the one he had in Dream Team again, and Mario's being original again. Though to be fair, it's somewhat similar to the one he had in Dream Team as well, but there he never did this shoulder rolling animation, which is why I called it a new one. And lastly, Luigi poking the side of his head while he's thinking, which he actually does a lot in this game, originates from Dream Team as well, where, yeah, he pokes his head while thinking. I'm sure there are some other animation references in the game, but these are the only ones I noticed and found. So if you know of any others, feel free to let me know down in the comments. Anyways, a cool feature of this game is that you can find some stone reefs out on sea, which often come in, interesting shapes. And more importantly, some of them reference characters from older Mario and Luigi games. So you know the drill, we're gonna cover all the reference ones. The Brock Reef is a reference to Brock Monsieur from Bowser's Inside Story, a blocky character that's all about blocks. Go figure. These reefs are all recreated on Shipshape Island with an attached poem, sometimes referencing the original character. Brock Reef's poem describes it as accented, which could be a reference to the fact that whenever Brock Monsieur spoke, he did so in a heavy French accent. The Ominous Reef is yet another reference to the Sharkbone enemies from Superstar Saga, and considering these enemies are just straight up in this game, I feel like a different enemy reference would have been better suited here. such as the Mushroom Reef, which is a clear reference to the Shroob enemy faction from Partners in Time, who play a massive role in the story. Its poem describes it as alien, which is a pretty on-the-nose reference to them literally being aliens that invaded the Mushroom Kingdom in Partners in Time. The Dream Guardian Reef is a reference to the Zkeeper from Dream Team, a legendary bird that's the guardian of the dream world. And lastly, the Princely Reef is a reference to the fan-favorite Prince Peasley from Superstar Saga, who was a character that occasionally helped the bros on their adventure and had a friendly rivalry with them. He was also Luigi's boyfriend. The Sharkbone, Zkeeper, and Prince Peasley Reefs also have poems, of course, but as far as I can tell, they don't reference the characters they're based on. Could be that I just can't tell, so I'm not sure if that's actually the case. Here are their poems, so if you know what they're supposed to be referencing, please let me know down in the comments. Well, that's most of the reference stuff I was able to find. So for now, let's move on to some mostly unique facts from this game. I'll go in order of when you'd find these in the game, so if we get too close to spoiler territory for you, feel free to click off the video. Here's something you can do in any battle. If you wait around and do nothing for 30 whole seconds, all UI elements will disappear and the camera will start panning across the battlefield, occasionally changing angles. Here's a really random one. On Bulbfish Island, you can stand on this table, which will cause the dude eating there to freak out, and then the other guy in the room will tell you to get off, which you then do automatically. And this is the only table in the game you can stand on. Yes, I did go around to a bunch of tables to test this. Thank you very much for asking. I know why they did this, it's because you have to go on the ledge above it later, and they didn't want to put a weird invisible wall there for seemingly no reason. So they just opted to make this funny little scene instead, which I can appreciate. There's a missable little scene on Shipshape Island where a ton of female characters get together to discuss fashion. It's a pretty standard and entertaining scene, but at the end, Peach says that she likes to change things up to match the task at hand, and that she has many outfits because of that. This to me feels like a pretty clear reference to the game Princess Peach Showtime, in which Peach dresses up in different outfits, which gives her different abilities to suit the task at hand. Starlo even chimes in, literally wondering about her fashion adventures, which is pretty much how you can describe that game. Later in the game on Bowser's Island, you get thrown into prison, needing to find a way out, and if you check the bars, Snoutlet will come out and say, well, these bars ain't budging, you can't turn flat like paper and slide through gaps, can ya? To which the bros say no, and then he says, yeah, that'd be weird, huh? Sure would be sweet to be thin like a piece of paper. This feels like an obvious reference to Mario and Luigi Paper Jam, you know, the crossover game with Paper Mario, in which there was also a scene where you're stuck in jail and Paper Mario just slides through the bars, because he's made of paper. If this is a reference to that, then I'm pretty sure this is the only Paper Jam reference in the entire game, at least that I was able to find, not counting gameplay mechanics of course, like the ability to guard attacks instead of just dodging, which was introduced in Paper Jam. But yeah, this scene happens on Bowser's Island like I said, meaning Bowser is in this game, which of course means you fight him at some point. Come on, is that really a spoiler? Anyways, this might be a stretch, but in this fight, Bowser has a punching attack, which could be a reference to his punching ability in Bowser's Inside Story, specifically the iconic sliding punch he performs against Dark Bowser in that game's final boss, since here it's also a sliding punch. Again, I'm not 100% sure if this is supposed to be a reference, since punching is like the most standard attack ever, right? But Bowser as a character really isn't known for throwing punches, with the sole exception of in the Mario and Luigi series, starting with Bowser's Inside Story, which is why I'm leaning more to it being a reference. Something here that's undoubtedly a reference, near the end of the game, yeah, by the way, spoilers, we are getting into endgame territory, so click off or skip to the next segment if you want to skip this. There's your warning, 3, 2, 1. Like I was saying, near the end of the game, a side quest opens up where you go to Bowser's castle for something, that has Starlo wanting to visit Bowser, as according to her, they go way back. If you choose to do so, you get a very fun cutscene, which starts with Starlo talking to Bowser through the door, during which Bowser refers to Starlo as Chippy, which is what he thinks her name is, since in Bowser's Inside Story, throughout the whole game, Starlo talks to Bowser from within his body, speaking on behalf of the bros, and she told him her name is Chippy, as to not give away her true identity. Later, when she actually enters the room, they bicker for a bit, and Starlo ends up giving Bowser a chicken drumstick, which is yet another reference to Bowser's Inside Story, as in that game, drumsticks are Bowser's main healing items. This entire quest just feels like one big reference to Bowser's Inside Story, which I love a lot. It specifically feels very reminiscent of that game's post-credit scene, where Mario, Luigi, and Peach send Bowser a thank you gift, which has Starlo inside, and also a cake that he begrudgingly accepts. And as for a last quick fact, the title screen updates depending on which point in the game you're at, First just having the logo, then Shipshape Island, then Shipshape Island with whatever islands you have linked, and so on. Generally, these honestly aren't that exciting, but I found 2 title screens with something interesting going on. If you're at the point where Fortress Socket becomes available, you'll see the extension corps flying by with snapters, and eventually they'll pass the camera really close by. Shun is notably being carried differently than normal for some reason, being held up by both his hands by 2 snapters, instead of just his head by 1 snapter as usual. And secondly, at the very end of the game when the Soli tree is introduced, Reclusa, the true villain, pops in every now and then in the background, before eventually jump scaring the player up close to the camera. I found out about this while writing down some notes for this video with the title screen open on the side, and the jump scare actually kinda caught me by surprise. Shoutouts to LureFX1, Quote is Cool, The Flying Fire, Giant Firing Coal, New Member Goomba Odyssey, Herc, Exobear, Lime the Chef, Sheen for the Win, Sil700, and the rest of my Patreon supporters. Something huge is coming to the Patreon soon, so go check it out if you're interested. And one last thing, I recently started uploading shorts on YouTube as well as on TikTok and Instagram, so feel free to follow me on either of those platforms if you're interested in that. With that all said, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you back here soon when I rank every single Smash remix ever made. Every one of them. Have a great day, and goodbye.